Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. I don't know when you're viewing this video. If you're viewing it probably in a timely fashion about the time it comes out, we're getting close to elections. And we're getting close to the time when our politics in this country, in the United States anyway, will be decided by the people. We're seeing a political situation in many ways in the end of the book of Acts here as Acts comes to a close, and Paul interacts with both the Jewish leadership and the Roman government. Last week we looked at chapter 23 where he threw the Jewish council into just a mess. And now at the end of Acts chapter 23, Paul is going to be going to Caesarea, and the Jews don't want him to get there. So they put together a plot. They're going to send out 40 people to ambush him along the road and have him killed as he's taken by the Romans to Caesarea. Caesarea is on the coast, on the Mediterranean Sea, named after Caesar, obviously. So on the way, before all this happens, the plot is disclosed, and then the Romans decide to up the protection. And here's the description of the protection, or the entourage that goes with Paul to Caesarea. Verse 23, he called 2 of the centurions and said, "At the 3rd hour of the night, get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen." That's 470 people that are going to escort Paul to Caesarea. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor. And then he wrote a letter to Felix from Claudius Lysias explaining to him the charges that were brought against the Apostle Paul. So they take Paul, they bring him to Caesarea, and he appears before Felix. In chapter 24, his defense is before Felix. And the defense is a pretty good summary of his last few days as to why he was charged. And the summary, the outcome in chapter 24, verse 22, but Felix is a Roman governor. He's the same thing that Pontius Pilate was, basically. But Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, that's the term that's used at this point for Christianity, put them off, saying, "When Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case." Then he gave orders to the centurion that he should be kept in custody, but should have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. So Felix is going to cop out on this thing. Felix is going to look at this and say, this is a no-win situation. He probably knows the history with Pilate, and Pilate's going around with the Jewish leadership and getting in trouble with the emperor because he couldn't get along with the Jews. And so Felix is looking at this and saying, politically, this is a hot potato. I don't want to touch it. I'll just kind of put him under arrest, but people can come and go and see him. He'll have some freedoms. And if I can put this off, I'm not going to be governor here forever. Somebody else can take this thing. So Paul ends up in the middle of this political hot potato, and he ends up incarcerated, sort of incarcerated, in Caesarea for a period of time. Paul eventually gets another hearing. This time, it's because another governor comes into power, and the new governor in chapter 25 is a guy by the name of Festus. Now, I'm old enough, I cannot read that without thinking about Gunsmoke and Marshall Dillon's sidekick. But this governor's name is Festus. He takes over the situation, and one of the things he does is says to Paul, what's going on here? What's the problem? And when you come to verse 8 of chapter 25, Paul said in his defense, "Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended at all." But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, "Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me?" Well, he'd be an idiot to say, "Yes, I want to go to Jerusalem and be tried." They want to kill him in Jerusalem. But Paul said, "I'm standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I've done no wrong, as you know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death." In other words, if you find something wrong with me, I'll take my lumps. "But if there is nothing in their charges against me, no one can give me up to them." And then Paul does something very significant. He says, I appeal to Caesar. That took it out of Festus's hands, it took it out of the Jews' hands, and it put it firmly in Rome's hands. Paul's a Roman citizen. He has a right to do that. And then in verse 12, Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, you've appealed to Caesar you shall go. And that's the end of Festus's dealing with this. So both Felix and Festus have gotten off the hook on this whole thing with Paul. They don't have to mess with it. Paul is going to end up in Rome. It seems like, almost for entertainment's sake, Agrippa the king and Bernice, his sister. Agrippa, this particular Agrippa, is the son of Herod Agrippa. Bernice is his sister, not his wife. And so brother and sister kind of sit on the throne here, and almost for entertainment, they ask Paul to come in and talk to them. And chapter 26 is Paul's defense before Agrippa and Bernice. At the end of that section, verse 32, having heard Paul, verse 32 of chapter 26, Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he'd not appealed to Caesar. Oh, the ironies of the politics. Paul appeals to Caesar to get out of being sent back to be tried in Jerusalem. And when Agrippa hears him, Agrippa says to Festus, you probably could have set him free if he hadn't appealed to Caesar. But he appealed to Caesar, so the whole thing's out of our hands. And so Agrippa dodges the bullet, Festus dodges the bullet, Felix dodges the bullet, and Paul is going to be on his way to Rome. The more things change, the more they stay the same, don't they? And folks dodged responsibility then, even as they do now. At the same time, God's at work in all this. The story of the book of Acts is the story of this gospel message getting to Rome. And the fact that Paul appealed to Caesar means that the gospel is going to go with Paul to the very navel of the world, the city of Rome. And we'll see that in future stuff they didn't teach me in Sunday school.